Hello there. I apologise for the wet hair, but I just got back from my absolute favourite reading room. The beach on the Gold Coast today is beautiful beyond measure, and it's my favourite reading room. So, before it pales in my mind, I've got to share with you the book I've just finished, Law of the Wolf Tower by Tanith Lee. Now, Tanith Lee, let's start with the author, Let's start with the cover. The cover looks very, very childish and childlike. It's quirky, it's cute. I mean, I like quirk. I draw quirk as well, but this makes the book look much younger than it actually is. The fact that it says shortlisted for the Guardian Children's Fiction Award doesn't help. I don't think this is a children's book specifically, but I'll mention that later. So, Tanith Lee, who very sadly died in 2015, was a British author of fantasy and science fiction, and she was an immensely talented author. I feel that in many ways she's far less recognised than she deserves to be, at least among the general public. I think sci-fi fiction circles, she's got a pretty impressive list of people who follow her, read her, really respect her, and she certainly has a lot of awards to her name. But in other circles, I don't think she's terribly well known, and honestly, her writing is so exquisite that it completely transitions between genres. She has her classic science fiction and fantasy, she's got horror, she's got kids' books. Later in her life, she actually wrote some that is more fantasy fiction, or I don't know, just plain fiction than anything else. So, speaking of all these books that she wrote, which was over 70 novels and literally hundreds of stories, she also wrote plays. I'm pretty sure that she wrote a couple of television episodes for a science fiction series that I don't think I've ever seen, but yeah, she wrote heaps. And I defy anyone watching this or elsewhere in the world to know how many things she wrote or to own them all. Unless you're a direct descendant of hers, in that case maybe she had a collection of everything she'd ever published. Otherwise, I think not much of a hope. So this woman had nearly as many publishers as she did novels. Seriously, she had dozens. She'd published 1 or 2 novels in mainstream. I think her first mass market paperback was The Birth Grove, and I think that was back in the 70s or possibly early 80s. So she does have a lot of ones in mass market produced paperbacks, but then she used small personal publishing companies, she used startup publishers. Many of them were tiny, absolutely tiny, and some of them don't exist anymore. It's like I've read a couple of her more recent books from the library. They're like this one from the 2000s. This one was published in 2007, I think. Let me have a look. No, copyright 1998. There you go. Older than I thought. To me, this feels like a very 2000s book. But yes, this is apparently one in a series. I'd never heard of the series. I'd never heard of this book. I love this book. So, Tanith grew up reading science fiction. She was the daughter of 2 professional ballet ballroom dancers, and she travelled a lot. She sounds like she was a child that every one of us isolated geek sci-fi children could relate to. She moved a lot. She grew up reading science fiction after she got to read, which was later because apparently she had a form of dyslexia. And she started writing at 9. She didn't start publishing particularly early. I think her first published work was published by a friend, and when she was in her 20s. But her writing style sounds very immersive. In the beginning of the book, she writes, "When I write, I go to live inside the book, by which I mean mentally I can experience everything I'm writing about. I can see it, hear its sounds, feel its heat or rain, and so its characters become better known to me than the closest family or friends." Considering how many of her books horrible things happen to the main characters and how many of them are horror, Bit of a worry, Tanith. Bit of a worry. Anyhow, she had this immersive writing style. Her range of influences was huge, way across the board, and that comes through, I think, in all her writing, but especially in the later writing, which is so rich and lush and interesting. Anyhow, so The Wolf Tower, like I said, it feels to me very much like a 2000s book, late 90s. I suppose it's nearly pretty close. I like Tanith's original writing style from the 70s and 80s, but I do think she got better as she got older. And by the time she was writing in the late 90s, 2000s, she had a much more accessible writing style, which I think features here. Here she's got a flawed yet immensely relatable central character through who you see the story, and a fascinating journey through a world which is described lightly. It could be a post-apocalyptic Earth, it could be a totally separate Earth. Now, Tanith's writing almost invariably, to my reading at least, has an element of a transitional character and coming of age themes, and it's usually based around a female character. I don't know that I've ever read a book where her main character wasn't female, and the females are often undertrodden, often bad things happen to them, I've got to say. So it's no different here. Our main character, Clady, all her life she's endured hardship. She grew up in the house, and there's a house and garden that are the entire world. Nobody goes outside it. Outside the garden there's the wastes where there's poison. Everything's poison and horrible and terrible. She's grown up knowing herself to be an orphan servant, and she's been given to a spoiled princess to serve her, which is certainly a hardship as she's described it. Now, that's how Clady claims to be writing her story as we read it, because at one stage she steals a small book from her mistress and starts writing her own story in it. Back in the house, she doesn't have a lot to her story, but she writes, and she's bored with her life, and she hates the place she lives in, its rules, its pointless rituals, its incredibly lush and luxurious, yet sterile seeming and abusive society, I suppose. That part is painted with a light touch, enough so that we can understand who Clady is, how badly she fits in with where she lives, and what that place is like. So during another pointless ritual, which is welcoming a new rose to the rose garden, a balloon appears over the wall. Everyone's terrified. It's invaders from the outside, and everything out on the waistline is poisoned. The modern reader wonders if this is like nuclear wasteland or toxic, but it's never really gone into in any detail. So the balloon is shot down and the person in it taken prisoner. This stranger from the terrible wastelands has invaded the sanctity of the house, and he's imprisoned. But before he's imprisoned, he's brought in front of the entire collective of guards and ruling people. The old princesses of the house are ones with immense influential power. There's 3 old ones, and the oldest of the old ones is Princess Jazania Tiger, who actually comes to this event of viewing the stranger, though she doesn't turn up all that often. The stranger offers her this amazing red flower, which sends Clady into a bit of a spin, because they've been told that nothing outside in the wasteland can grow, that the house and the garden is the only living place. And she's already questioning her world significantly by this point, so this adds questions. Now, after this, Jazania Tiger sends for Clady, specifically for Clady, from her serving the princess moment, which is just as well, because she's just slapped the princess she's meant to serve and bad things are about to happen to her. And she tells Clady things that further make her doubt her world. She then takes Clady to see the stranger who's incarcerated, and once there, she tells him that Clady is actually a princess, Clydissa Star, and she opens the way for Clady to help the young stranger escape from the house before he's executed the next day. Clady's never seen anyone like this. She's sent into a complete spin by his appearance, which is described as very attractive. If this was any other young adult book, then this would be the love affair, but it's Tanith Lee, so trust not the young adult genre or the child genre, trust only the story. Thank you, Neil Gaiman, for that one. Okay, so within Lee's writing, you frequently get these featured themes that appear common, but end having completely non-conformist interpretations, and there are frequently feministic elements to her plot, though many of them are wildly individualist. I remember reading some of her early stuff and going, well, I can't tell if this is actually feminist or not because it's too weirdly atavistic and I've got no idea what's happening, and I think this book is similar. So Clady and Nemian, like I say, in any other book of this type of age group, they would be the designated couple, but it's nowhere near that simple. And Clady herself is nowhere near that simple. She's obviously got a strong will, she's intelligent, she's been questioning her life, but she's often grumpy and snarky. She's a very, very flawed character, and not for a second does she think that she's anything but. She's an incredibly reliable narrator when it comes to herself. So while she's got this fascination with the handsome stranger, she's also fascinated by the idea of escape from the house and not being bitten by a thorned web, which she was worried might be her next step, having slapped her princess. So she helps him escape, as has all been laid out by the old princess, and off they go romping through the desert and meeting strange cultures, which Nemian seems to be able to speak many languages. Clady knows nothing about the world outside. She's completely reliant on him. And both Princess Jazania Tiger and later Nemian tell her that having rescued him, she's going to be taken to his home. And so she basically follows him through this journey, but her attitude to the journeys and the adventures is deeply ambivalent. So rather than throwing herself into a journey in the way that you might expect more traditional characters to do in this type of fantasy, Clady questions everything, but most especially herself. She trusts nothing, not even Nemian, and only really herself. That's very much a Tanith Lee attitude of a main character, but this character suffers less than in some of her earlier books and is far more modern, I guess, in some ways. Clady feels like a real person, and the fact that she knows so little about the world around her makes sense given how she grew up and what she's been given. Her ability to introspect, however, makes her writing about her experiences quite dramatic. She's definitely not a people pleaser. Her relationship with Nemian follows themes and questions that you actually never see in young adult or child books. Clady being fascinated by him, and initially she's sure that she's in love with him because she's so fascinated by him, but when she looks at him, she falls into him. And I'm sure we all remember being young enough that if you're staring at the object of your fascination, you just lose the world. Well, she describes this here, but once he's no longer there, he doesn't seem to be particularly interested in her, except when he's desperate to have her keep her with him. His behaviour is inconsistent, and Clady is confused by that, but she becomes more and more exasperated by it as time goes on. So yes, Clady's introspection is far more consistent with an adult Tanith Lee as an author as it would be with a sheltered 16-year-old, but that's what really makes this book snap. So at one stage, she's rescued from being thrown off a cliff as part of a sacrifice by a group that she's had described as dangerous, murderous bandits, but they actually seem to be a sort of nomadic, almost gypsy-style group. And because she's no people pleaser, she goes along with things, but she starts to actually find a place, and with that starts to find, I feel, a confidence in her own character, in the people around her, because people who grow up isolated, while they may have a very strong character, their ability to intersect between their own character and how the world around them views their character may be difficult. Through her journeyings with the Hulda, is it? The people? The horse people. Gypsies. Sure. Okay. Her character seems to really settle, and she becomes an even more interesting character than she was before. Now, we finally leave the gypsies and travel down river through swamps, and we finally get to Nemian's house, which is a city in which there are 4 animal towers, one of which is the Wolf Tower. He's told us that his tower, the Wolf Tower, is the most powerful in that city. And once they get there, having rescued him from the house, she will live a life of luxury and respects as Princess Clarissa Star. We find, of course, this is Tanith Lee after all, that it's far from that simple. And I'm not going to tell you what, because I really liked the unveiling of the story after we arrived in the Wolf Tower. The description of that society and how it works and the lore of the Wolf Tower, as the title suggests, is truly fascinating, and I enjoyed every second of that last part of the book. It was like the whole thing was a fascinating journey, but it was building up to this really, really strong, really, really strange culture and the ending. Clady's ability to deal with the situation is wonderful, possibly quite unexpected. I found it unexpected, and the ending of this book was excellent. And there's more in this series. Apparently it's one of 3, I believe 3. At least one other was published at the time that this one was published. The next one is called Wolf Star Rise in Silver Publishing, which is a division of Hodded Headline, neither of which I've ever heard of. Thank you, Tanith, for spreading the love around. For a while there toward the end, I was really, really scared that she would have done what so many more modern writers do and not give us an actual ending to the story in this book, but force us to go on to the next to have closure. But she doesn't. The story arc in this one completes beautifully. As a standalone, this works. If I ever get the other book or books in the series, I'll be delighted. I'm not holding out high hopes for any time soon, though, and in the meantime, this is a gem of a book. I don't know that you actually want to give it to a child, even though it's shortlisted for the Guardian Children's Fiction Award. I think maybe an older child who is a mature reader, sure. As a young adult, our main character is 16 and Nemian doesn't seem to be much older. I think this would work for someone in their early teens or early young adulthood, if I meant to say that. But honestly, I think this probably works best for a mature adult reader who enjoys that reading that slightly fantasy, questy type book with a young reader. And many young adults will enjoy it, but it doesn't have the standard, I guess, young adult themes that you would expect. I think that someone who's used to, I don't know, Cassandra Clare, Sarah J. Maas type, slightly pulpy but very predictable young adult may not enjoy this one as much, because this is a fully unpredictable work. Tanith Lee at her best for unpredictability, at her best for good characters, perfect writing, and the world lost a great star when we lost Tanith Lee. And so I think you should read this book if it sounds intriguing to you. But if not, go ahead, read other good books, because we should all read good books. Thank you for watching.